Yeah, so I spoke to this guy called Yuri. I mean, we just had to track them down. They weren't being made publicly available by the authorities, but we managed to track him down through a sort of family support group. Yuri Kosminski was the youngest Marine on the island. He was 20 at the time. He was on his kind of first assignment. He had never been to Snake Island before. He'd arrived a couple of weeks before. This detachment of Marines was there to protect the island and also to protect the border force, which is a kind of separate branch of the armed forces, which, as its name suggests, looks after the borders. And Snake Island is in the Black Sea, but it's right on the edge of territorial waters between Ukraine, Romania, and Moldova. So it's, I mean, those are friendly countries, but it's still a sort of sensitive area and a potential border place. So they have a detachment of border guards there. They also have a small detachment of guys monitoring Air Force radar. So they were quite important as well on the day.
And from speaking to him, you discovered that there are a number of misconceptions about the Snake Island story, aren't there? Particularly when it went around the world so quickly with that famous radio message telling the Russian warship to F off, and that was a symbol of Ukrainian defiance. But there were a number of elements of the story that perhaps spread inaccurately. Can you go into them?
Yeah, we sort of knew at the time. I mean, pretty quickly afterwards, that there must have been more to that story than we thought. I mean, the original story was that there were 13 border guards on this island, and that they'd said, "Go f yourself, Russian warship," when their surrender was demanded, and then not long after, the lines went dead, and they were allegedly obliterated and so on. But it wasn't actually long after that the Ukrainians said, "Oh, actually, no, we do believe they're alive." I think it was the next day. That was on the actual day of the invasion, the 24th, and I think the next day officials started tweeting, "Oh, actually, they are alive." I think my suspicion is that they knew all along, because this recording, the famous recording that was played, to the world, was available because it was on an open naval channel, naval channel 16, I believe, is for the technical buffs, which is an open channel, and so presumably the subsequent conversations in which the Russians continued to say surrender, and the commander of the island, of the forces on the island, the border guards and the Marines, said, "Okay, we are somewhat outgunned here." That would presumably also have been on the open channel, and I'm sure the authorities would have known about that. So we knew that, and then I got more details from Yuri. For example, we also knew later, but only much later, some months later, that there were Marines on the island as well. So Yuri tells me that there were, in fact, 80 people on the island, not 13 as originally said. Those 28 were border guards, 44 were Marines, 6 were these radar guys, and then there was a lighthouse keeper and a port pilot for the jetty, both civilians. So 80 people altogether, not 13. They when the Moskva, what was the flagship of the Russian fleet, sort of hoved offshore, started bombarding the island with heavy shelling, and then landed some squadrons of Russian paratroopers. These guys on the island, who only were armed with sort of rifles and a couple of rocket-propelled grenade launchers, did decide that discretion was the better part of valor, and they were then surrendered and went off to captivity for months and months and months. And the half of them were released in November, including Yuri, who I spoke to, and the other half are still in custody in Russian prisons.
And Yuri spoke to you about the other half, didn't he? And what he fears they're going through at the moment.
Yeah, he said, I mean, as you know, you haven't had many pleasant stories coming out of Russian prisons since the start of this conflict, and he painted a pretty grim portrait of the Russians' treatment of the prisoners of war. He said he was whipped and beaten, threatened, and then they tried to get him to defect. They tried to, or at least to take Russian citizenship. Slightly odd thing to do if you've just beaten somebody up. Say, come and be one of us. Which they all resisted. and so yeah, very unpleasant conditions for them, and he's worried that there'd be more of that going on for the. I think it was around 36, 38 guys he said were left there.
Mm. And the Russian warship was then very famously sunk.
Yeah.
What's the situation on Snake Island today, a year on from this famous story?
Well, there is a comic aspect to this. The fate of Snake Island after the troops left. I mean, it would be comic if it wasn't part of such a grim and horrible situation and conflict. But there is a slightly amusing aspect to the fact that the Russians took this island with all this effort and all this, fanfare around it, and then didn't really seem to know what to do with it. They established a garrison there, but they have control of the Black Sea anyway. It's not that strategic a place after all, it turned out. And the island is within range of the Ukrainian artillery on the mainland, and they gave it a pretty good shellacking. And so eventually the Russians themselves withdrew on the grounds that, they were getting bombarded for no particularly good purpose. So they then withdrew. The Ukrainians then took the island again, put their flag up, realized there was no point in, suffering the same fate as both the Russians and their own troops first time round, so scarpered pretty quickly. So now it's an island with a flag and some wild animals and nothing else. So Snake Island, this vital symbol of the early stages of the war, is now uninhabited and nobody really cares about it.
Well, Richard, it's a fascinating piece, looking back on that amazing moment really in the war, and thank you so much for talking to us about it.
That's a pleasure. Thanks a lot.